be able to see my screen, no?
Yes, your screen
Yeah.
is good.
Cool.
Transcript and recording has started, and it's all yours.
Well, thanks, first of all, for having me and making the time for joining this session and being part of our community as well. We really, really appreciate you all being so willing to spend your free time, talking about the stuff that we work on and helping us build a better product. So when I say us, I mean us working at Microsoft. I'm a Microsoft employee. I am a product manager on the Power BI team. I focus mostly on the programming language that everybody loves to hate, which is called DAX. You might have heard about that. Does anybody know what that stands for, by the way? DAX? Maybe? Anybody? Maybe in the chat, you can take some guesses. There will be no points or no rewards for knowing that, but hey, it's just, interesting tidbit of information. And today I want to talk about what we've been working on for the last almost 3 years. We've just been talking about it as well, that we've talked about this subject a while ago once. I've talked about it publicly once a while ago, and that was just me verifying that we were on the right track in our development. And now we're getting so close to a public preview that I'm doing the rounds on all the user groups and whoever will listen to get as many people as I can excited for this development that we're going to talk about. I'll monitor the chat. And then I'll also, at some point I'll ask for questions, and then feel free to unmute yourself and just jump right in if it doesn't fit in the chat. Okay. But let's get going for now. Okay. So making DAX easier, that's the topic for today. You might know me from the blog or from any other social media that you've seen. Kevin, you probably looked that up, right? Didn't you, or did you know that right away?
I didn't know it fully right away. I did look it up, but I was given time to see if anybody else put it in the chat. So
yeah, it is data analysis expressions. That is the name of that's actually what DAX stands for. So you might know me from the blog or from social media. Here's my connecting information if you need me. I'm on social media, and then here's my email. So shoot me an email whenever you need me. I'm always happy to chat. So yeah, I've been working on this team for like 4 years now, almost. Been 15 years with Microsoft, so I've seen quite a few areas of Microsoft and also consulting areas and stuff like that. So I've been around a little bit, and Power BI has been my one true love. So I'm really excited that I'm now for 4 years already almost. I've been on this product and actually making a dent into what Power BI should be and be one of the persons that get to change the product and decide about the future of the product. So it's really exciting for me to be there. So as I said, we're talking about DAX today. That's the ownership that I have. I do some more stuff, but for now, it's just let's focus on DAX. So can we just do a quick show of hands using the raise your hand feature? Who here has ever struggled with DAX or thought that DAX was really hard or harder than it's supposed to be?
that keyword was ever, right?
Yeah.
Because
yes, ever. The keyword being ever. I would kind of assume that most of you would raise your hand, because the moment you start going one step further than the standard, oh, let me just do a this plus that or do a simple sum, you notice that DAX is not as easy. It looks very easy. At the beginning, it looks like, oh, it's just Excel formulas. I can do that. But then once you start diving a little bit further, you go like, there's a concept of filter context, there's calculate that I need to worry about, and then suddenly it starts like your brain starts melting a little bit. And that's just the reality of where we are, right? And it's interesting to notice that so many people are saying that DAX is hard, and that's a feedback that we get loud and clear. And they're not wrong. DAX is hard. Don't get me wrong. I struggle with it all the time. And it's interesting that our core programming language for our calculations is perceived as so hard, yet Power BI is so successful in the marketplace. It's really a testament to the quality of the rest of the product that our programming language is so hard that we got that far. And that doesn't mean that we cannot do anything about it. And that's really where we started working on for a while now, almost 4 years ago, to start thinking about what is the plan there. So we really today, this is how most of us write DAX, right? You find something online, might be some community forum, might somebody blog, might be some social media, might be here, might be one of these books, right? This one being very famous. I like this one because it's written by 2 Dutch MVPs, so I can't help myself. I have to show that, of course, proud Dutchman as I am. But this is, of course, the standard book and training on it from Marco Russo and Alberto Ferrari. That's what you basically people go through, right? And you read this and you might not understand it after the first reading. You read it again and you read it again, and then finally it kind of clicks, right? Maybe, hopefully. I don't know. It never really clicked for me, to be honest. So, and then that's saying something. I'm the DAX PM, and I don't feel comfortable with all of these concepts that are in here. So, yeah, so that's a challenge, right? You copy paste and you maybe cross your fingers, you invoke some higher whatever being if you're so inclined or not. That's totally up to you. But that's how people write DAX. And there's a challenge there, because who's going to tell you if that thing you copied from whatever source is the right thing? If you cannot validate that DAX, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, how will you ever be able to trust those results? You can test the results, you can try the expression in some visuals, but that will never be 100% coverage of all the situations that calculation will be put through with when your users start using this, right? So how do you validate that even? So this is really a challenging situation. So then the other problem is things that people think are very easy to do in DAX are not as easy to do. For example, something that most people think is very basic is doing a running sum. Running sum is not rocket science. It's literally just a thing that you can do with basic math. You can, with a basic understanding of math, if you know addition of numbers, you can do a running sum, right? A running sum is take a number, add the next number, add the next number, and keep going until the end, right? That is basically what a running sum is. It's that simple. It's not rocket science. Everybody can do this with a piece of paper and a pen if you have basic understanding of addition. You don't need subtraction or division or whatever, just addition. Or in Excel, it's very easy to do. Now here we are with the leading BI tool, the business intelligence tool in the market, analytics tool in the market, and then doing a running sum is hard. In fact, if you start searching for it, you'll very quickly find a website that quotes 21 steps to doing a running sum or running total in Power BI. Let that sink in for a second. 21 steps. We're not talking about rocket science here. That is 20 steps too many. This should be easy to do. This should be our bread and butter. And why is this so hard? Well, there's a couple things that make it hard. But one of the problems that DAX has is it's really hard for a calculation to refer to what came before it when it's being executed. That is really hard to determine. It's really hard to write. It's really hard to guess. And that makes writing these type of calculations really tough to do. Because essentially that's what you need for a running sum. You need to know what came before me and then do something with that. So let's face it, that's the situation we're in. DAX is hard. And if you start thinking about that a little bit more deeply, really what is happening here is that DAX is part of the model in Power BI. And the model means your DAX is always executed in a certain context. We call that the filter context, which is basically dictated by the settings and the selection that people make on the tables that are related to where the DAX statement is being executed. So if you have a fact table in the middle where you have some measured on and you have some related tables to it, those selections on those related tables like customer and date and region, they all dictate the context in which that little DAX statement that's sitting here in the middle is being executed by, and how that's being executed. You don't see that. That's visualized nowhere. When that DAX statement is being executed, it's not visible. You don't see it in the DAX statement at all. You just have to be aware of it, and then you have to be defensive in your DAX writing to make sure that in every given situation, you do the right thing. that is really where this becomes an n-dimensional problem and it starts hurting your brain. And that's because these DAX measures live in the model, and that's where the complexity comes from. This filter context actually is a model artifact, the result of being that. Now, as I said, we have typical business type calculations that managers or new users expect to be easy to do, are surprisingly hard because DAX is unable to refer, or almost unable to refer, back to what came before me. Quick measures is a way to do this. Quick measures is available in two options. One is basically you picking a template. That option is great. It gives you the answer, but the DAX it generates is horrific and really hard to understand and really hard to validate and tweak. So if the answer it gave you is almost 95% there, but you need 5% tweaking, tough luck, right? That is like you need a lot of understanding of DAX to even be able to parse the result that it gave you. The other one is the natural language to DAX thing that we also talked about just before the recording, which allows you to just type some natural language and get a DAX suggestion, but that thing still requires you, and as we say in the UI, you still need to validate this result. So the DAX outputs is in the same ballpark as the quick measures. It's up to you to validate that. And what happens if you can't validate that because it's too complicated, because you don't understand the DAX statement it just generated? You still are stuck. So here's where we started dreaming a little bit. What if you could define, do away with all this complexity and define something else? So for you to understand this, we need to talk about Power BI as a pipeline. So think about Power BI as a pipeline that starts with raw data. Then data gets transformed using, for example, something like Power Query, and then it gets loaded into your data model, your semantic model, right? Today, that's where you define your measures. Inside of that model, inside those tables with those relationships. That's where the measures and calculated columns live, with the complexity of the model. Then you continue on, and at some point, the data gets aggregated, and then finally shown on visuals on the screen. The visuals on the screen don't work on the lowest level of data. They take aggregated data and only care about exactly the aggregation that they need. What we're saying now, what we've been thinking about, what I want to present to you, is what if we didn't only allow you to do a DAX calculation all the way up front in the pipeline, but way later in the pipeline when the data has been aggregated and the filter context has been applied. Just before we paint that visual onto your screen, we allow you to do a DAX calculation. Wouldn't that make your life easier? Well, the answer is, I think, a resounding yes, because A, there's no filter context to be worrying about because all of that is already applied. The visual needs to do it anyway. So that has already happened. You're not working with low-level data. There's not millions of records, just aggregated information. You can literally walk up to it and see the table that's there. I'll show you that in a second. So I think your life gets way easier if we allowed you to do that. And then we can do interesting things because suddenly now we're doing DAX calculations on a visual. We can now do stuff like make it easier to write that DAX statement, and also maybe even not do a lot of typing, but do Excel-like gestures or point and click with a mouse, as we like to think about it. That doesn't require you to know all these intricate details of this language. So that is what visual calculations are. It's a feature that's upcoming, which we call it visual calcs for short. These are DAX calculations defined on the visual. It's not a new language, it's just DAX, but now available on the visual. And it can refer to whatever is on the visual, including on any other visual calc. So you can build a visual calc on top of another visual calc. The calculations are executed in scope of the visual, not the model. That sounds limiting, but it's actually a good thing, because we put you in a little sandbox. In this little sandbox, you get the stuff that lives on the visual. Anything that's on the visual is accessible to you. Anything that's not on the visual is not accessible to you. So that means for a visual calc, it can only refer to what's in this little box. And that's great, because if you wanted to reach back out into the model, you would have to worry about that filter context again. By us putting you in this little box, that filter context is just basically outside of your house. You don't have to worry about it. You're just playing inside of this little room, and that's where you're dealing with. Let the filter context be applied already. You don't have to worry about it. You basically get blinders to work with aggregated data in an area where filter context doesn't even exist. So your DAX calculations are then executed inside that little box. And then you can do more stuff, more interesting things like, well, now that we're inside this little box that has knowledge of the visual that we're on, we can actually start referring to the visual structure, because now suddenly we have a construct of DAX that allows you to inspect the visual that you're on, instead of you being in a model and no idea where that measure is going to be on a card or on a map or on a line chart, small multiple. You don't know how that measure is going to be used. Here, you're defining a DAX calculation in scope of the visual, so you already can refer to what's on the visual and the structure of the visual to use it. So that's also another nifty trick that we have. So you might think like, wait, are you taking something away? No, we're giving you another option in your toolbox. Calculated columns still exist, measures still exist, and visual calculations are a new kid on the block, which is essentially the best of both worlds. So we're taking the best from calculated columns, which is a row-by-row analysis and evaluation, and then we're also taking the best from measures, which is on-the-fly calculation, and bringing those two together in Visual Calcs. My expectation is, though, that once this is there, people will gravitate towards Visual Calcs and not to measures and not to calc columns. Why? A, they're easier to read, easier to write, easier to maintain. They perform way better than anything else because they work on an aggregated level of data, and they're more flexible because you can refer to the visual structure. So in the end, that is the direction we think strategically that people will go, but we'll see. Okay, so Visual Calcs, WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. Eventually, we'll also provide point and click. We're not quite there yet. We'll also have high-level functions that make it easier to work with this, and you can, as I said a couple times now, refer to the visual structure. So I've got one more slide before I jump into a demo. This next slide is the most important slide of this whole presentation because this will make or break your understanding of what Visual Calcs does. This was all built around one central mental model. And the central mental model is you can represent any visual as a matrix. Doesn't matter what kind of visual it is. It could be a card. That will be represented as a single cell matrix. It could be a map. It could be a small multiple. It could be a hugely complicated R visual. Doesn't matter. Always it is somehow representable in a matrix. That's the core premise. Okay? So now what we're saying is while you're adding a calculation on the visual, we'll show you the visual, and we'll also show you the visual matrix, that matrix that represents the same data as the visual. We'll show you those two. Then when you're working with visual calculations, essentially what you're doing is you're adding fields, you're adding columns onto the visual matrix. So if you want to look at the right side of the screen here on the PowerPoint, there's a little mock-up. It has a bar chart on the top. It contains 3 groups, one for each year, so 2018, 2019, 2020, and then 2 numbers for each year, right? One number is sales amount, and the other one is total product cost. Makes sense, right? For us to paint that onto the screen, that visual, we only need 3 columns and 3 rows. One column is called year. It contains 2018, 2019, 2020. One column is called sales amount. It contains the sales amount numbers for those 3 years. And one column is called product cost, and it contains the product cost for those 3 years. That's all that we need to paint that visual onto your screen. Now, these numbers, sales amount and total product cost per year, might have come from many, many millions of aggregated rows, individual sales records that we aggregated towards these numbers. That's irrelevant at this point. If you were writing a measure, you would have to worry about that. But now you don't have to worry about that because this is the stage of the pipeline that we're in. Remember, we're all the way at the end of the pipeline. We're now just milliseconds before we start painting that bar chart onto your screen in our code. We're now just looking at that phase right before it's being painted onto your screen and going like, well, this is the stuff that we're playing with. And now on here, on that 3 column, 3 row table that I need to paint this bar chart of 6 bars in 3 groups onto your screen, I can now add columns. And that is what visual calculations are. I can now add extra calculations to extend this visual matrix. Make sense? Cool.
I think so. And when I think about it, right, it's kind of like if you have a visual or a report page, you have a visual, you could at any time say view as table.
Yes.
Right.
Essentially, that's it.
Essentially you're seeing that same thing and then you go from there.
Yes.
And I must have taken the statement that Amin had because he had his hand up for a second and went away.
Yeah, Amin, you want to say anything or no?
No, this is terrific. This is terrific. Thank you. Keep going.
All right, cool. Then we're gonna move to a demo. So I'm now switching to Power BI Desktop, so I'm assuming you'll see that. Stop me if you don't. But this is Power BI Desktop. This is not fake. I'm not showing you some mock-up or some design or whatever. This is actually in the product right now. You don't have access to this yet. That will come soon. But I'm not pulling your leg. This is live code on my machine. Okay, so we have the VentureWorks here. I picked the VentureWorks because I kind of assume that most people are somehow familiar with that. And I'm just going to build a very simple visual. Whoops, I dropped it the wrong location, of course. So I'm just going to take sales amount, total product cost, and I'm going to take the fiscal year. Okay, so simple, straightforward bar chart in this. Oh, the other one's a column chart, actually. Just the one in the slide. I called it a bar chart, but of course it's a column chart. Anyway, you got the meaning of what I was saying, I hope. So this is a bar chart. Nothing special. It just shows me I'm gonna sort by year because that makes more sense, right? I want to have the years like sorted ascending. So ever 2018, 2019, 2020 is on top. Makes sense. So we're ordering that. And then for each year, I'm showing you total product cost, which is the light blue bar and the dark blue bar being sales amount. Right? Very straightforward visual. Now, one new trick that I can do is once I selected that visual, one of the new buttons on the ribbon becomes enabled, and it says new calculation. And when I press that, I'm dropped in what we call the Visual Calcs edit mode. This should look familiar now because I just showed you the mockup on the screen in PowerPoint. And this is essentially this thing, but then live in code. So what you're seeing here is the visual that I selected, right? Same visual as before, slightly zoomed in. And then the formula bar, we'll spend lots of time there. And then the visual matrix. Again, that visual matrix represents the data that's in the visual, the aggregated version of that, the data that the visual needs to paint itself onto the screen. You can check that that's correct because, for example, here you see sales amount crossing the 50 million bar for 2020. If you go look at the visual matrix, you look at sales amount and FY 2020, you see it's 51 and something million dollars, right? So these numbers match. Make sense with me so far? Cool. So now you can see that on the visual matrix, there's already a new calculation. That's a placeholder. We want to be inviting, right? We want to allow you to extend this visual matrix, as I said, with simple calcs. So now let's just do something. And I know I'm going to start with a simple example that should have been a measure, but I'm just, warming you up to where the real magic actually is. So I'm just going to say profit is sales amount minus total product cost. Now, what this will do is we'll take for each row, we'll take the sales amount, subtract the total product cost, and return that value in the cell for that year, right? This is almost like you're writing a calculated column, except now it's on a visual, on a highly aggregated level. If I did this in a measure, arguably this should have been a measure, I had to add on sum of sales amount minus sum of total product cost, which is something that is already kind of weird to some of our new users. They were like, I'm just subtracting two fields. Why do I need to aggregate that? Well, here you don't have to because it's being executed row by row by row. So essentially, that's what I'm doing. Also, notice I'm not referring to any table. There's no knowledge of me for me that this came maybe from different tables, different fact tables, or that year was a different table. It was a different table in my model, but I don't see that here. I'm just dealing with the names of the stuff that I'm working on. I don't care if it came from 20 tables or 50 or 100 tables. In this case, it came from 2. I don't care. I don't have to know that. I just work with the names that are here. Okay, so I'm just going to commit this. And of course, this will just calculate the profit. Taking sales amount minus total product cost. Very, very simple. Very basic stuff. To prove to you that it's just about what I'm looking at right here, I'm going to rename sales amount to say Kevin's sales amount. And it renames it for this visual, right, as you would expect. And then profit, if we go inspect that again, we'll see that it's now just referring to Kevin's sales amount. So it literally just works with what you're seeing here on the visual. Okay, cool. Let's do something slightly more intelligent. Let's do, now that we have profit, we have years. Maybe I wanted to compare the profit for each year versus the year that came before me, the previous year. So I'm going to write something that is profit versus previous. Well, the first ingredient I need is profit. Look, it already helps me because it tells me these are the things you can work with, right? Which is essentially the stuff that's on my visual. Great, profit minus. Now I need some way to get the previous profit. Any guesses to what the name of the function would be that I would use to get the previous profit?
Anybody?
Anyone? Could it be
same? I'm sorry.
Yeah, go for it, Regina.
Same period last year?
You're making it way too complicated. What would be the function for previous profit?
Parallel period. Okay.
No.
No?
Previous.
Previous?
Yes. Look, just literally just English almost. Previous of profit. Look at this. It doesn't get more simple than this. This is almost just English. It's like, oh, I'm taking profit, I'm subtracting the previous profit. Hit enter, and I'm done. And I'm calculating the difference in profit. So I love your answers, by the way, Regina. It shows that you already have a lot of DAX knowledge. That's great. I'm not trying to like disregard that or whatever. It just shows that you're already thinking way too complicated. Because you have to worry about that right now. In this world, you don't have to. Same
This
period
is
last
awesome.
year, you don't have to worry about it.
This is awesome.
Well, hold on to your hats. We're only getting started. There's way more coming, and there's a couple people in the chat that actually got it correct. So Esther and Aman got it correct. So thank you. So what if you wanted the next year, Esther? Well, guess what? What would be the function to get the value for the next year? Next. Would it really be that simple? There we go. It's that simple. It is literally that simple. I knew this would work. I wrote this, but yes, it is that simple. So I'm going to get rid of this because it's confusing for the rest of the demo. But yes, we'll have a function called next. So Esther, you're right there. Perfect. Okay, let's add some more. Let's do something more intelligent. Let's do a running sum of profit. We've been talking about running sum. So I want to do a running sum of profit over these 3 years. Any guesses? What would be the function for a running sum? Well,
Can a column refer to itself?
Running sum.
whoever said running sum is right
Oh.
on the money. I mean, this is it. This is all you need to know. No more earliers and top N1s and max of date lower than the current date, blah, 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 summarized table, summarized columns. No, 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 no. No more calculate. You don't have to worry about that. This is literally all you need. It's English. Give me a running sum of profit. And it's DAX. It's not English, it's DAX, but we make DAX look like English. Will this do the work? Of course it will, because I know it did. There's more. We also give you an FX button with templates to help you get started, because you might not know what kind of things you can use. So we give you templates. Templates are just quick starting points. After you use these a couple times, you'll probably just start typing it on your own. But you can use these to get started, right? So let's do well, moving average. And I think somebody, sorry, I'm gonna butcher your name, Adaji. Sorry. I'm gonna get back to your question in just a second. Let me finish this first part of the demo, and then we'll show you exactly what you're after in the next demo. So I'm gonna take a moving average. So any guesses to the function name for moving average? I'm not gonna wait this time. You should know how my brain works by now. Of course, it is just literally called moving average. Okay, so moving average of profit, and then I'm gonna present a window size of 2. So this basically means take 2 years and then take an average of the profit for those 2 years and return that value. Okay, so for 2018, well, the return value is going to be 3 million and a bit because there's no other earlier year. So that's then the window is just one slice. So average of one number is, of course, that same number. But for 2019, it will take 2018 plus 2019, take the average. 2020 will be the average of 2019 and 2020, and take that and return that average. So that is that's the result. It is that easy. Okay, let's do one more. What's the difference from first? Well, let's see. Well, I'm going to take profit minus, well, should we take a guess at all? Maybe there's a function called
Do it.
first. Of course there is a function called first. Done. There's a function called last as well, before you all ask. This is so easy. You can keep going and keep going. Now, there's a couple more things up my sleeve that I haven't shown you yet. Percentage of parent, percentage of grand total, average of children. Those are really complicated things to do today. We have special functions that we're introducing for this as well. So for example, you could say a percentage of grand total, which basically means if you take that template, it says divide, which is already existing function, divide something, which is profit. For example, I want to calculate the percentage that each profit represents in the total profit. Profit by, and this is a special function called collapse all, which basically means in a certain direction. So axis is a direction. You can see the little icons downwards, right? Across the matrix downwards with the little downwards pointing thingies. It's called rows, across the rows. That's how you should read this. We're basically saying divide profit by something that is evaluating profit, removing all detail on the row level. So we're basically saying, go down the rows, remove all details. So whatever is the total of those rows, the grand total of profit, take that, and that's the number. So then we're dividing profit for each year by this number, because we're removing all collapsing, which is basically removing all detail on the rows direction, right? So this takes some getting used to, but after you got this, we'll basically give you a percent of grand total. Now, this is not formatted as a percentage. We're not done there yet. We're not ready, but that's basically what that is, right? Average of children, same thing, but then the opposite direction. We have a function called expand, which is basically add more detail for this part of the expression. I'm maybe on the year level, I might have quarter. I want to calculate what is the average of the quarters in each year. I can do a profit, divide profit, take an average, of profit with the expand of profit on rows, which would add one more level of detail, right? It's a dynamic one because I have month below me. Then if I'm on the quarter level, month are my children. So then that same expression that I entered to calculate the average of quarters in each year now also works to calculate the average of months sales in each quarter. So that expression is the same thing through and through. So you will have those functions to work with. Now, there's one more thing that we need to do, because this is all great, and I'm glad you guys are excited. But the visual looks, well, awful. I kind of screwed up my visual by doing all this, right? So how to resolve this? Maybe the answer is I didn't want to, I only want to see the profit versus previous and all those other interesting calculations. I only want to see those in the tooltips. So I only want to see one bar actually, and then when I mouse over, I want to see the more advanced calculations. So you might be tempted to just start cleaning up your visual matrix. But remember, the calculations can only refer to what's on the visual matrix. So if I start deleting stuff from the visual matrix here, this whole house of calculations that are dependent on stuff will crumble, because if I delete Kevin's sales amount, profit won't work because it's referring to Kevin's sales amount. So then it won't work. And then this guy, profit versus previous, is referring to profit. Won't work because profit is returning an error. This is returning an error. That's returning an error. That's returning an error. And that's returning an error. So all the house would fall down. So clearly, deleting stuff from my visual matrix to clean up my visual is not the answer, because we told you, you can only refer to what's on the visual matrix. So that needs to stay the same. So what else can we do? Well, if you divert your attention to the right side of the screen, you might see an icon that you've seen in the model view before, where you can hide columns and tables with this little eye icon. And we basically use that same thing to say, okay, now you're going to hide fields from view on the visual. They still will be there on the visual matrix because your calculations need them, but you don't have to show them on the visual, right? So if the end result was, I only wanted to see profit versus previous on the bars, I'll just hide everything until I'm there, and then I'm moving everything else to the tooltips, for example, because that's what I said I would do. And now look at how my visual is changing, but my visual my visual matrix has, okay, it has reordered, that's a bug, but it hasn't changed in structure. All the fields that were there are still there, right? But the visual itself is now very simple, and it only shows the profit versus previous that we talked about to create. And then when I exit, I see the profit versus previous, and when I go over, mouse over, and I see the tooltip, I see all the other detailed stuff that we talked about.
Beautiful.
That's exactly what I was hoping you would say.
You're getting a lot of applause and hearts, and I don't know if you see that.
Yeah. No, I do. Thank you for that. I love that feedback. So somebody's asking, does this work in drill down? Yes, it does. So drill down is fully supported. A chart that has multiple levels, you can drill down and drill up and drill through. All those things will work. So that's great. So that exists. Now, before I start answering more of the questions, I have a little favor to ask. If this floats your boat, and if you're excited about this, and if maybe I even blew your mind, you would make me very happy if you went to your favorite social media account. If you're on social media at all, don't go creating accounts just because of this. But if you are, and if you're so inclined, you would make me very happy if you shared a short message about what I showed you and how I've blown your mind, showing you the future of where DAX is headed in Power BI. That would make my day. So if you have time and you want to do that, I would be very appreciative of that. Please tag me so I can track it. So that's that. So let's see if there's any more questions. I think there's one question. Do we have a way to manage these visual measures? For complex measures might need multiple steps to get there. Okay, so pardon me for a second. I'm going to be very pedantic. These are not measures. Please, please, please don't think about them as measures. They are not measures, and they have nothing in common with measures. As in, they share the same idea, but they're not measures. In the way they're being executed, the way they're being calculated, they're more like calculated columns than measures. That's why they are called calculations. So please, when you ask that question, don't talk about this as visual measures. They are not measures. They are visual calculations. That's for a reason, because to set them apart from the complexity of measures, they are not the same animal in a different jacket. They're a completely different animal that has more to do with calculated columns than with measures. The only thing they share is the fact that they are calculated at query time, not at refresh time. So as needed, they are calculated like measures, but that's all they have to do with them. So I'll turn my pedantic mode off. I don't want to attack anybody, but please don't call these visual measures, because that will just lead to more confusion in the market. We're calling them visual calculations, so let's all align to that same term, please. Thank you. Do we have a way to manage these visual calculations? Yes. So you can actually do multiple steps to get there, right? So you can do the visual calculation in multiple steps. For example, I did a running sum of profit. Profit was a visual calculation, which in itself was dependent on sales amount and total product cost. So you can build this in multiple little steps. In fact, we encourage you to do that to keep all the steps simple. So that's one. Second, we will come up with ways for you to manage this both on the admin level, to scan all the visual calculations being used in your environment, so you can understand what people are doing, and also sometimes maybe elevate these visual calculations into model measures, semantic model measures, because you might discover that everybody is building this running sum of profit, Well, why not just offer that running sum of profit as a measure so everybody can just use the same exact definition so you drive clarity and less confusion, right? So that's also something that is definitely something that we're working on. We are also thinking about how you can elevate or promote a visual calculation to a model measure, which would then allow you to write the simple visual calculation, validate the results, and then say, store this as a measure back into my model, where we would do the heavy lifting of writing that complicated DAX that we would need to convert that into a measure. So that's another thing that we're working on. Now, doing that would actually still mean that we do our best to write the right DAX for you, but still the onus would be back on you to validate that that's the right result, right? We'll do the right work in the context that you asked us now to convert this measure into this visual calculation into a measure. But again, all bets are off. Depending on how you're going to use that measure in the future, the DAX might be correct or no. That's the whole problem of why we wanted to get out of this measures world in the first place, to give you into a different view mode on a calculation. Okay, any more questions before I go deeper into this topic?
Well, did you see Esther's? It's kind of a question. It's kind of, I don't know, it was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, right? But should I bother learning DAX? It's the next chapter in the book that she's reading to do running sum. So how, now that I think we could take that as a serious, I think it was half joking, half serious, right? What do you think about how people should learn DAX in the future, or even if they're trying to do it right now?
So please learn DAX. Absolutely, because we're not giving you a new language. This is still DAX. So the basic concepts of DAX, the basic syntax, the basic understanding of an average X function or a sum X function, they still apply. Using a switch statement in Visual Calcs is a great idea. So understanding those things, absolutely. Also, visual calculations are not an excuse not to learn DAX, because eventually you might have to deal with the complexities of DAX. You might have to deal with calculate, the biggest beast out there, arguably, which then means you also have to worry about filter context and most primarily context transition. So the moment you get to the really advanced scenarios, you will have to do this anyway. But the goal here is to flatten the learning curve. So today, the learning curve, if you were to chart that, would be this. Like a hockey stick going up very quickly after you dabbled in it for like 10 minutes. After you did your basic sum, you would have to teach yourself about the filter context and the context transition, and calculate would be there. Our goal here is to flatten it so it at least is more gradual increase. And then you could spend years on the gradual slope before you hit the steeper slopes instead of hours. Our goal is to keep you, get you there like more gradually. So I like to think about that as, where's that slide? We call it fattening the donut. Sounds weird, but walk with me for a sec. Think about DAX as a donut, right? Donut is round, it has a rim, there's a hole in the middle. And while you're walking on the rim, everything is fine. But very quickly today, you enter the hole, the black hole where calculate lives and filter context and context transition lives. That's where infinite complexity lives. That's also why I painted it black on this screen, because it's a black hole, and that kind of matches with what black holes are in space, right? They suck up everything. It's all the complexity that's there. Our goal here is not to plug that hole. We're not taking away calculate from you. There are situations where you still want to use calculate. In fact, when you use my functions, the functions that I just showed you, not my functions, the functions that we designed, you are actually using calculate, but you don't see it. We're just hiding it from you. Calculate is still there in case you need it. In case you need to take that extra step to tweak it to exactly what you wanted, you can still use calculate. In fact, you have to, but you won't have to for a majority of your scenarios. At least that's our expectation. So we're not plugging the hole. We're not turning the donut into a pancake. That's not what we're doing. But we're fattening the donut. We're making the rim broader to allow you to walk on that happy, sticky, maybe pink, whatever your preference is, surface a little bit longer. or a lot longer before eventually you will have to face the devil that's in the middle, where the complexity lives. We're just giving you way more time to ease yourself into that by turning it from a very slim donut with a big hole to a very broad donut with a hole. So that is the plan. That is what we're doing. We're called this fattening the donut. And then how this works is I already showed you first, or running sum, or all of these that I showed you, those functions will what we call expand themselves under the covers into calls to calculate. So I'm jumping around a little bit, but you might have seen the window functions. In December 2022, we released the window functions. Who saw that and thought to themselves, I have no idea what those people are doing? You can be honest.
I saw them and tried to use them a little bit here and there, but then quickly moved away from them, kind of learned some concepts. There were some people that came up with interesting code around it, but
yes.
Yeah.
And what was happening there is I was showing you the Lego bricks that I was using to build this house with, but I didn't show you the house that I was building. Because all of these functions, almost all of these functions, are shortcuts to those window functions. So the window functions I'm talking about: index, offset, window itself, order by, match by, partition by, rank, and row number. These are all very powerful functions, but it's still not very easy to use. However, these shortcuts, first, running sum, moving average, previous, they're all shortcuts to these underlying functions. So what happens is you write, for example, here on the slide, first sales on year to say, in the year direction, I want to get the first sales amount. So whatever is the first year, get me that number. That's what you write. But under the covers, what you actually have written here is calculate sales for first of year. That's how we transform this. And then that thing in itself is then transformed into calculate sales index 1 on year, because first is just a shortcut to index 1. You see how this was being built? So then the last line is what I showed you in 2022 in December. You went like, okay, great, but moving on, like you said, Kevin. But now I'm showing you the stuff that I was building on top of this, which actually makes total sense and way easier to use, right? I think we can all agree on that. So that's one other thing you should know is these shortcuts, these easier to use Visual Calc functions have their equivalent in window functions, which means they can be expressed in those window functions, which means they can also be expressed in a measure and can be reused in a measure in the calc column eventually. So that is then what you need to know about that. So I'll show you exactly those functions in case we haven't talked about it yet. So visual calcs are DAX calculations in scope of a visual, they're not measures. And you get new functions and new concepts to work on. So it's just DAX. So most DAX will work. Something like this with a switch through on sales amount to divide your sales orders aggregated into a certain category will work just fine. Basic arithmetic, like I've shown you, will work just fine. A sum x, average x will work just fine. New visual calc functions are then available. Why does this matter? I will give you some examples. Let's do a running sum again of a calculation that sums sales amount over year. Here's how you would write it. First off, first bullet point in current DAX, which includes calculate of sum of filter, all selected is on or after max of date of year descending. Not easy. Visual calcs, call it running sum. Done. If this doesn't convince you yet, wait until I have the next one. Given a list of states and number of restaurants per state, for each state calculate the difference in the number of restaurants in that state versus the one above me in the visual. On the left, the current DAX, which arguably is horrible. I didn't write this. I was unable to write this, but I have an escape hatch where I can call Jeffrey Wang, one of the inventors of DAX, and ask him to solve the problem for me. This is what he wrote. By the way, he does that right away without any help in Notepad, without any support in like IntelliSense or whatever, just perfect DAX. But that's just amazing. Not everybody has Jeffrey Wang on call. So This is how he built it, with a summarized, creating a temporary table with all selected and then getting a selected value, and then taking a top n one. This is the black magic, taking the top n, the first row, just a single result from an ordered list based on that filter and the temporary table, which was the missing piece for me, and then returning that, subtracting with another some x involved. Horrific. Then when we shipped window functions, this became easier, going to the right. Now we're doing a calculate of number of restaurants, but then offsetting by state with a -1. Basically saying, calculate this number of restaurants, but in a context of where you moved from the current restaurant, from the current state, one state up, offset -1, move up one direction, one row above me. Great. Window functions made it way easier than the regular DAX. And now with Visual Calcs, we're saying, hold my beer, previous restaurants minus previous of restaurants, done. Essentially, under the covers, these are, well, not essentially, these are exactly equivalent. The same code is being generated, the same code is being executed. You just don't have to worry about all of this.
And more importantly, the results are the same.
The results are exactly the same, yes. And they're faster because, well, you're not going to the low level of detail anymore because you're working on the aggregated level. So we're introducing a couple new functions, and that's what I'll leave off with. These you already know. Those are called the low level functions. We already talked about them. They're already out there. You don't have to worry about them right now, but just know that everything you do in Visual Calcs can always be expressed in these functions and then calculate. So if you want to rewrite stuff into a measure or calculate a column, these are the functions you would use. So you can already start learning these if you want to. You don't have to right now. And then on top of that, we have medium level functions. These fall out in different categories. Movement functions, previous, next, first and last. So those are shortcuts to offset and index. So previous is a shortcut to offset -1. Next is a shortcut to offset 1, moving one item forward, downward. First is moving to the beginning of a certain direction. So first is a shortcut to index 1, and last is a shortcut to index -1, moving to the last one on a certain axis. And then we have lattice navigation functions, which I showed you collapse all. Everything else is there. So expand all is basically adding all detail, and then expand is the more gradual approach, saying expand down to this level instead of all the way to the lowest level. Stop halfway. And collapse is of course doing the reverse, but then removing some level of detail, not all, which would be collapse all, but just stopping halfway, going upward. And then range is defining a slice easier than using window. And then on top of those, we have running sum and moving average, two functions that I've already shown you. Now, this is just about all you need to know. There's more to uncover here. The one thing that I really have not really touched upon is the concept of axes. So axes is what makes this all work. So by default, we set the axis to rows, which basically means we're going down the visual matrix. If you have a matrix that also has columns with actual information onto the right, left to right, you can also have your calculation go left to right. We call that direction columns. We are smart about which direction we allow you to specify, because not all visuals have that extra direction, but some have, some don't, many don't. So then you can write columns. So you basically, instead of having your calculation, for example, you're running some execute this way, it would then execute this way. Okay? And then since we have those two, rows and columns, you can then also combine these two and say columns rows or rows columns. Now, I'll break your brain with that for a little bit, but bear with me. Okay, so here's a matrix example. First sales amount on rows. This is going down the rows. So look at the colors. The dashed lines refer to the solid lines. So you see each calculation is being executed for each category down the rows for each year separately, right? So the dashed lines refer to the dashed lines in the right color. Makes sense, right? Calculation for each year gets the first sales amount on rows, which happens to be the first sales amount on category. So for each year, we're now returning the sales amount in that year for accessories. Okay, let's do a 90-degree turn. Now we're doing first sales amount on columns. We're now going horizontally. So now we're not taking the first sales amount for the same year for accessories. We're now saying within the same category, take the sales amount for the first year. So this now, the colors are going horizontally. So now the dashed lines still match up to the solid line, but now each calculation is being executed and then getting the sales for the first year per category, not the other way around, where we had the sales for the first category in the same year. We're now doing this across the years. Makes sense, right? Now this is where it gets complicated. If we combine these two, you could actually take another example, previous, of sales amount on rows columns, which basically means for each cell, we treat the previous sales amount on a row above it, or from the last cell in the previous column. So looking at the colors again, so you'll see that, 2018, we start with that, right? 2018, this is the previous row, makes sense, that number. This previous row makes sense, that number. This previous row makes sense, that number. This guy, if I just wrote previous of rows, would not have been used, because if I wrote previous of rows, when I arrive here, this would have been empty because there's no row above me. But since I wrote rows columns, this is now allowed to refer back to the last cell of the previous column. So this is what I like to call the planter movement. It goes up, down, up, and to the right, down, up, and to the right. Following that kind of movement over your matrix, okay? So then the last one, returning 90 degrees. Now we're going horizontally first and then down. So now columns, rows, which basically means for each cell, we treat the previous sales amount from the row to the left, from the column to the left of it, or from the last cell of the previous row. Look at the colors again, right? We're seeing that here, calculation in 2019 gets the sales amount for 2018. Makes sense, previous column. Calculation here doesn't get any value because there's no column to the left of it, nor is there a row above me. So I cannot get anything. So that's empty. This one refers to that one. Makes sense. This blue one would have been empty if I just wrote columns because there's no column to the left of me. But instead I wrote columns, rows. So now this will get the last value of the sales amount for the last year in the previous category. And then the yellow one will just refer to the yellow one. So this is going like a snake across your visual matrix. Now, if this hurt your brain, don't worry. I'm fully aware that 95% of the cases you would never, ever need this columns, rows, or rows, columns. But I want you to be aware that that exists in case you might need it. These are around, but basically the basic one you will be using is rows, because that's the default that you might have to type, or you don't have to specify because we fill it in for you automatically, or columns, depending if you're in the matrix that you want to go horizontally. And then the other two are just advanced combinations of those two. So that's all I wanted you to know and remember of that. Hopefully you'll remember a little bit of that. So I'll just stop here and open it up for more questions.
I actually think that's going to become very powerful once you could come up with. I could see it's going to be a low number of use cases, but in the use case that you're actually going to need it, it's going to be extremely powerful.
Yes, it's going to be very powerful. But yeah, it will be limited number of use cases that will need this columns, rows, rows, columns kind of behavior. But they do exist.
Yep.
Yep.
All right. Questions? Anybody want to come off mute and ask a question or put it in chat? I see Aman came off mute already. Go ahead.
Well, I like the picture. I really had no idea what was on tap tonight, and this is incredible. And Jay, I mean, to have you coming here presenting this topic, like, yeah, blow my mind. Understatement. That is just incredible. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You've really driven hard the idea that this gives us a better ease of use of the system. And you've also mentioned how it'll be more efficient. And it kind of makes me wonder, because people who have much more complicated situations than me often complain about, speed of things. And of course, they're very complicated situations. You never really know. But has your team reflected at all on, I don't know what you would reflect on, to think about how big a difference will this make in performance-wise?
Yes.
To different clients?
We did. 500%.
Wow.
And that's average.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's not a maximum. That's average.
Wow. That is fantastic. It's incredible. Just
because
incredible.
It's very easy to understand. Let's imagine I am the size of Walmart. I have billions of sales records, right? Maybe even whatever is a higher number above billions. I don't know. Doesn't matter. When the visual is painted onto the screen, what Power BI will do, if I ask for example, total sales for a year, it will go to that warehouse of all those sales records, start summing it, and show it to me on the screen. Okay? Great. So far, so good. We're not taking that away. That still needs to happen for the visual to be there. However, now you're writing a measure that takes that sales amount and the total product cost for each record, for each sale, and says subtract the two. Nothing happens because you're not using that measure yet. Now I'm adding that measure onto the visual over here, where it shows sales amount by year. What happens? You would maybe think that we would do that hard work of summarizing everything from all those individual billions of records once to show it in the visual and also calculate the measure. You would be wrong, sir. We do it actually twice. Once for the visual, and then once again we go back to the detail level to calculate that measure. So we do the whole thing twice. Visual calcs don't do that. Visual calcs say, you know what? You already aggregated the information for me. You have to do that anyway. I'm just going to run over that aggregated information. You're showing 20 years? Great. So there's 20 numbers for me to work with. Or if I'm subtracting sales amount and total product cost and I'm 20 years, then I have 40 numbers to subtract. Can we all agree that Power BI is probably able to handle 40 subtractions in lightning speed? I think so. And that's essentially what I'm saying. Instead of going back to the low level of data, that's not what we're doing here. We're just taking the abstracted data, the aggregated data that's already there that we need to create anyway. But because you wrote it in a measure, those measures, 99.9% of the measures never benefit from this aggregation. They are not aware of that stuff happening. So here the only thing we're doing is saying, let's not stop doing that. Let's just benefit from what we already did instead of doing another table scan, if that helps you, if you're technical, like if you know a little bit about technology, it's literally a table scan that's happening in the background. Instead of doing that again for each measure that you add to the visual, because remember, if you add 5 measures to that same visual, how many times that all use that low-level data? How many times did we do that table scan then? Once for the visual? Once for each measure? Yes. So then 6 times in total. If I have a measure with visual with 5 measures on it, 6 times we go back through all of those billions of individual records. If we just stop doing that and we go from 6 to just 1, imagine the performance benefits we get. And then 500% is an average number.
That makes sense to me. Hopefully, Amin, that helped you out too.
Yeah, I mean, wait, aren't we supposed to act like when is this?
I was waiting for that question.
I was waiting for it too. And I can tell you when it's coming. And Christmas is really, really, really early this year. Because this will hit your desktop in March of this year.
This is amazing. This is just amazing. How are you going to make? It's like Santa Claus. How do you get to every Power BI user group between now and March?
I've been talking about this for almost a year now. I think this is my 40th user group session.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great.
Daryl has seen quite a. No, not Daryl. Where are you?
Yeah,
Mr.
I'm here. I've seen a few. I saw
Yeah,
a
you've
couple.
seen a few of them.
Yeah, I saw
Yeah.
you. Were you in Portland? Portland one?
Yeah, I was in Portland as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I go to the Portland one quite often because it's in the same time zone, so it's kind of nice.
Right, and Donald Parrish, he already left, but he's been to a lot of them as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I've been talking about this for a while now. So yeah,
and if you
it's
want
coming.
to hear it again tomorrow, I know you'll be at the San Diego one.
Yeah, you
Tim,
can
that's
just
usually
join,
here. I think that's why he's skipping tonight. So
you can join me again, and I'll tell you exactly the same stuff with probably different words because I don't have a script. I just do this off the cuff, of course. I think there's a very interesting question here in the chat. Would this be for all Power BI tiers? The answer is a resounding yes. Everybody will be able to benefit from this. Doesn't matter if you use import or direct query or a combination or proxy models or direct lake modes, doesn't matter. We're going to give this to everybody because we want everybody to benefit from this. This is not for premium users only or whatever. Everybody that uses Power BI can benefit from this from day one.
yep, because it'll be in the desktop. It won't be up on the service yet. So if you're,
Yes.
you have to do it off of the desktop release when that comes out.
Yeah, it
And
will
I'm
be in the
assuming
desktop
it's going to
release.
be a preview feature you have to turn on.
Yeah,
as
you will have to
normal,
opt
right?
in. So we'll tell you how to do that, but we'll just go into options and then turn it on, restart your desktop, and that's where it is. It will be in preview mode for a while. Let's just be very transparent.
Mm-hmm.
We're only getting started because I promised you loads of things at the beginning. Like I said stuff about you don't have to type. I did an awful lot of typing. And I also pointed at some point to saying, you know what, this is a percentage, but we didn't really format that, right? So there's lots of loose ends. We're just getting started with this. This is our first iteration of our public preview that is coming to you in March. And then from there on, expect regular updates every month. We're also looking for your feedback. We want you to jump in now so you can tell us where we went wrong. We made so many choices in the last 3 years about how this should work. And while I'm confident about our ability to make choices, we also don't cover everything. So we have a limited worldview. So I need you all to step in now, or when it's there in March, and then try it in your real life scenario and tell us, yes, this is great. Oh, and by the way, this is not so great because of no, right? That's the only way we're going to deliver a good product. And we have time. We are working on this. We have so much that we still need to do. There's so many things that don't work yet. We're just going to be out in the open, and hopefully you all will jump on and give us that feedback, and then we can deliver that incrementally and slowly work towards general availability. There's no documentation yet because this hasn't hit public preview yet. The only thing you have is this meeting, this recording. That's all there is. Documentation will come as soon as this hits public preview.
And the roadmap. I just shared the link to the roadmap
Yes.
item.
Yes, it's
right?
in the roadmap planned for March on there, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Daryl signed up for San Diego. I don't know why you do that, Daryl. It's going to be the same talk, the same guy, but fine, whatever. Different t-shirt.
It might get through to me more and more. You never know, right? I guess I
you
could
never
always
know.
watch the recording for the one here, and that'd be the same thing, right?
Right.
Yeah. I have this recorded. I'll have it up on our YouTube channel hopefully before I leave on Thursday. We'll see how that goes. Let me get the channel link for y'all here in just a second.
I could skip tomorrow, I think, then.
Yeah, you can skip it. It's okay. You're forgiven, Daryl. It's okay, mister. You've been
I
to
didn't
so
know it's
many
the
already.
same thing. I didn't know it's the same thing till you mentioned it. Then I looked
It's
at
the
it,
same
whoa.
thing. It's the same person. I'm talking about the same thing. I'm doing the same song and dance.
Jay, let me ask, you guys must have, I'm sure you've given this 40 times. It's kind of like what you said about the donut. I mean, people are going to get into Power BI and with this feature, and this is what they're going to learn.
Mhm.
And they're going to wonder how it ever existed without it, right? Like
Yep.
that's kind of it. That's how you introduced it. There's this gap. There's this cognitive gap when you first start using the tool, and you're trying to erase the gap with this thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, people, if you take this away, not you, well, yeah, you're the PM. If you take this away from people, they're going to be like, what? I can't use it anymore.
I'm not
Desktop
taking
is
this
broken
away.
without visual caps.
No, wait. I'm just doing this for myself. Let's be very clear. I struggle with this every single day for the last 15 years, which is basically the duration of my career. I struggle with this. So I want to solve this for myself. Okay, now you all can benefit. Oh, just kidding.
And you get to keep your job.
Yeah. So no, we're not taking this away. We're very serious about this, and I also want to give credit where credit is due because Esther is also alluding to that, like who actually came up with the concept of visual calc. So when I joined the team 4 years ago, I started looking at like, oh, okay, I own the DAX area. What are kind of the big things that we're still considering doing? What are like loose ends? And I found a couple of specifications from PMs before me who tried to actually deliver this concept. And there were 3 PMs before me who wrote functional specifications that never went anywhere that actually talked about this. So I didn't dream up the concept. And actually that concept of one of those specifications was shared with 2 famous authors, Marco Russo and Roberto Ferrari, a little while ago, when one of those PMs was around still, so my predecessors. And if you go search for it, you'll find an ideas web forum on our ideas forum where Marco Russo presents this as an idea. And also there's a blog post on SQL BI about the case for visual calculations, or the case for calculations as part of visuals in Power BI. That is because they were talking to that PM at the time and were like thinking and very excited about the idea, right? But that's where it originated. The only thing I did is take that and I never let go. And that was almost 4 years ago. I was like, this is so cool. We need to make this happen actually right now. I got the support of the inventors of DAX, Jeffrey Wang, Marius Dumitru. There we go. Thank you, Amon, for putting that there. I got the support of them. They are involved into this every day. Like I work with them regularly to make this happen, right? So it's not that I'm doing this on my own. This is like a whole team of engineers and architects. The creme de la creme of Power BI people are getting together. The what is it called? The dream team, as somebody called them, of the architects, are getting together to make this happen on all levels of the product. So this is not just me. This is like 20 other people who are involved. I'm just the lucky one who gets to talk about it. So I just also want to give credit there to that team, because they are doing amazing work to make this all reality for you all. So I didn't come up with that. I just found it. I was like, this is the thing that I've been after all this time. And I'm going to make it it sounds very grave, life work. That's not what I meant. But I'm going to make it my immediate goal to make this happen.
Yep.
I'd say
And
go
also
ahead.
giving me
Go
job
ahead, make it
security.
your life's work. Go ahead.
Sorry?
Go ahead. Call it your life's work. I don't think anyone will argue. I mean, anyone will complain.
I hope there's a little bit more left in me than just this. I mean, I'm very excited about this. Don't get me wrong. But there's also more stuff that I want to do on top of this. I mean, I as I said, I've used the analogy a couple times, and I'll use it again. The window functions that we created were the foundation for me to build this house on. I'm actually planning to build a whole, like, what's the word? Skyrise? High-rise
Yeah.
on top of this. Because there's many other things that I struggle with in DAX that I can now solve because I've been building these layers. For example, custom totals. Would it be great if I can easily tell Power BI to not reevaluate the measure on each total or subtotal level, but instead use a different expression, or just give the visual total.
Yes.
That is now possible using these things. In fact, you will be able to do that using this stuff when I get it to you. You will still have to write some code. You will have to do like a couple of functions with an if. But then the extra layer I'm talking about is, don't worry about all that. We'll just give you a UI. And then we generate that if for you, because now we have all the building blocks. So I can add those extra layers on top of it. So I'm not done at all. So this is, yes, this is not just a bare foundation. This is going to be a house that we can all live in and enjoy. But I'll keep adding layers and layers and layers on top of that, as long as Microsoft allows me to.
And I think that's important to kind of everybody to recognize too, right? Is, you know, there are problems that'll be solved that are very easy that you've showed today, right? And there's probably some that you'll be able to write other things to do. It won't be as easy, but it's got, as you build your high rise, it'll become easier and better, right? So don't, you know, we can't go in expecting the world on day one type of thing.
No. But we'll get there. And I hope
Yes.
I hope that the stuff that we've been working on for like the three and a half, 4 years now is so good and so exciting for you all, that you have something to chew on and work with and learn and enjoy, while it gives me time to build that extra next layer, right?
Yeah.
And then when that's ready, I'm gonna show up again and hopefully that will be 3 years out after we've done this. So we'll see.
Anybody else have any other questions before I turn the recording off?
This is your chance. Anything.
All right, I'm stopping the recording.